Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday, Yom Shlishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Melissa in Great Neck, Nancy, North Carolina. Sharon in New Jersey. Lorraine in Texas. Yehuda in South Carolina. Jay in Minnesota. Shandor in the Bronx. Renee in Indiana. Bill in Mid-Missouri. Bella in Florida. Lucy in Minnesota. Chaim in Florida, and Elise in Virginia, and Moishi in Brooklyn. Welcome, everybody. Fun page today. I'm going to take us back to Noah's Ark. Okay, our daf is page 116, continuing our discussion of the first Mishnah, I think the only Mishnah here in chapter 14. The general topic was offerings that would not trigger liability for offering up outside the Holy Temple because they are not the kind of offerings that would be offered up or would be qualified to offered up on the altar in the Holy Temple, since they're not fit to be brought as offerings, or they're not the type of animal that is brought up as an offering, or they're the right type of animal but not, a scapegoat or a red heifer. Those are not offerings brought up on the altar in the Holy Temple. Therefore, if one brought them up on an altar, in a private altar outside the Holy Temple, he might have violated lots of prohibitions in doing that, but not the prohibition against offering up outside the Holy Temple. And then apropos that discussion, the Mishnah, which was one of the longest Mishnahs in the Talmud, also went on into some historical detail about when private altars were permitted in Jewish history, before the giving of the Torah, when the children of Israel first entered the Holy Land during the wars of conquest, and during that period between when the Tabernacle was at Shiloh and when the national altar was reestablished in Jerusalem. And there were some other historical matters that we're going to go into today, let's just get into it. Okay, so we picked this up at the bottom of page 115b. The master said in the Baraisa, this Baraisa is going in, some adding additional detail to what our Mishnah said. The master said in the Baraisa, before the tabernacle was established, all animals were fit to be sacrificed. All meaning a domesticated animal and an undomesticated animal, or a bird. As we'll see, this still means kosher animals, but whereas only cows, oxen, and sheep and goats were the mammals that were brought as offerings in the Holy Temple, prior to the Torah telling us this is your national altar, in conjunction with the tabernacle that would later be replaced by the temple, and these are the animals that you bring as offerings. Before the Torah instructed that to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, other animals were brought like deer and impala and ibex. These are kosher animals, but undomesticated. So domesticated and undomesticated, or a bird. Of course, birds are also brought, but very limited number of them, doves and pigeons. Seems that perhaps other birds were also able to be offered during that period. So the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? And Rav Huna said, as the verse states, with regard to the offering that was sacrificed after the flood. Okay, way back in human history. We're talking about after Noah and his family survived the flood. and then the waters receded, and that period ended. It was like coming out of COVID in a sense. And they sacrificed offerings before the Lord. So Rav Huna said, as the verse states with regard to the offering that was sacrificed after the flood, quote, "And Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every pure animal and of every pure fowl," fowl, F-O-W-L, right, birds, "and offered burnt offerings on the altar." That's Genesis 8:20. So the Gemara explains that animal, behema, is understood in accordance with its plain meaning, a domesticated animal, and the same is true of fowl. An undomesticated animal, chaya, is included in the term behema that is stated in the verse. Now we're on page 116a. So that which is taught in the Baraisa, all animals were fit to be sacrificed, males and females, unblemished and blemished animals, pertains to that which the master said as a principle concerning the laws of sacrifices. The requirements that an offering must have an unblemished status and that a burnt offering must be a male, that applies to animal offerings. But the requirements of unblemished status and being a male do not apply to birds. Birds don't have to be male birds to be brought as offerings in the temple. Nor is there this sense of blemished and unblemished when it comes to birds. And in the verses that recount Noah's sacrifices upon exiting the ark, a domesticated animal is juxtaposed with a bird in the verse, quote, "of every pure animal and of every pure fowl." Genesis 8:20, which teaches that kosher animals had a status identical to that of birds and could be sacrificed whether male or female, unblemished or blemished. Now the Gemara adds that which was taught in the Baraisa. Unblemished and blemished animals serves to exclude animals that are lacking a limb, which were not fit for sacrifice. As Rabbi Elazar says, from where is it derived that an animal that is lacking a limb is forbidden to the descendants of Noah? Now when we talk about the descendants of Noah, in Hebrew the B'nai Noach, here we're talking about the broadest category of humankind, but it doesn't mean everybody. Excluded from the B'nai Noach are the Jews, right? So the Jews are a separate category because here we're talking about legal categories under Torah law. Why do we call everybody the B'nai Noach and exclude the Jews from that? Because everyone is obligated in the 7 Noahide commandments, but the Jews are also obligated in many, many, many more commandments that regulate, every aspect of our lives. So, as Rabbi Elazar says, from where is it derived that an animal that is lacking a limb is forbidden to the descendants of Noah to be used as a sacrifice? So the verse states, with regard to Noah, and of every living being of all flesh, 2 of every sort shall you bring into the ark. That's Genesis 6:19. And with regard to the phrase, and of every living being, which is superfluous, the Torah stated, bring an animal whose limbs are all living, i.e. not an animal that is lacking a limb, as that animal is disqualified from sacrifice. Now remember that on the ark, they came 2 by 2, right? So there was a male and a female of every species, except for these, pure species that were fit for sacrifice. And of those, there came 7 pairs, so that they could be, eaten for meat and brought up as sacrifices. So the Gemara challenges, but perhaps this phrase, and of every living being, serves to exclude an animal with a wound that will cause it to die within 12 months. The wordy definition of a treifa. That word in Hebrew is treifa. What it means is an animal that has a wound that will cause it to die within the year. In a sense, it's walking dead. So the Gemara explains the disqualification of a treifa is derived from the phrase lechayos zera, right? To keep seed alive. That was the purpose of having these male-female pairs of every species to keep seed alive, right? To keep that species alive so it would survive the flood. To keep seed alive. Now, the Gemara challenges, well, this works out well according to the one who says that a treifa cannot give birth. In this case, the disqualification of the treifa is derived from the verse to keep seed alive, while the disqualification of the animal lacking a limb is derived from the verse and of every living being. But according to the one who says that a treifa can give birth, then what can be said? According to this opinion, a treifa cannot be excluded by the phrase to keep seed alive. So the Gemara explains, doesn't the verse state, with regard to the animals that were brought by Noah into the ark, you shall bring into the ark to keep them alive with you. With you. And the term with you indicates that the verse is stated with regard to animals that are similar to you, right? Similar to you, Noah, and the other humans with you. You're not going to die within a year, and the animals have to be like you also. They can't be treifas. So the Gemara asks, well, but maybe Noah was a treifa. If so, one cannot exclude a treifa from the comparison of animals on the ark to Noah. And the Gemara answers, it is written about Noah that he was complete, which indicates that he was physically whole and unblemished. And the Gemara challenges, yeah, but perhaps the verse means that his ways were complete, and it is not referring to Noah's physical attributes, but rather his fine character traits. And the Gemara explains it is already written about him that he was righteous, which means that his actions were perfect. Consequently, when the verse states that he was also complete, it must be referring to his physical manner, that he was a complete person. He wasn't missing a limb. He wasn't a treifa. He didn't have a wound on him that would kill him within a year. And the Gemara challenges, but perhaps the verse means that Noah was complete in his manner, and he was righteous in his good deeds, and accordingly the verse would not exclude the possibility that Noah himself was a treifa. And the Gemara responds, if it enters your mind to say that Noah was a treifa, would the merciful one have said to him, bring in other animals like you, right? And say, don't bring good examples of the species. Bring in wounded animals who are likely to die within a year. That would make no sense at all. So when God said, bring in other animals like you, who are whole and healthy, like you are whole and healthy, it makes no sense if Noah was a treifa. So rather, Noah was certainly not a treifa, and the fact that a treifa is disqualified for sacrifice can be derived from the phrase, with you. Now, the Gemara asks, and once we derive the disqualification of a treifa from the phrase with you, why do I need the phrase to keep seed alive? And the Gemara answers, if one could derive only from with you, you would say that Noah brought the animals to the ark only for the purpose of companionship. And therefore, even an animal that is old or even one that is castrated could come into the ark, provided that it was not a treifa. Therefore, the merciful one writes to keep seed alive, which teaches us that only animals that were capable of bearing offspring were allowed to be brought into the ark. Again, it seems so obvious to us. The whole purpose of the male and female pairs was so that they could reproduce and repopulate the earth with their species. But the Gemara is being very careful to examine exactly what we learned from the language. And just as we learned that all those animals were healthy and capable of reproducing, these are qualities that are also going to be necessary for an animal to be healthy and whole and unblemished and to be brought as an offering. Now, the Baraisa also teaches that before the tabernacle was constructed, sacrifices were, let's not talk about unblemished, because that seems that was not a requirement before the Torah was given, certainly for offerings brought by Jews after the Torah was given, whether at the tabernacle or at the temple. Then, yes, obviously they needed to be unblemished. But even prior to the Torah being given, when people were bringing sacrifices, they had to be whole, right? They had to be at least capable of reproducing and have all their limbs. But they didn't have the complex rules of blemishes. That did not exist yet. Now, this Baraisa that we're examining, giving further detail on what the Mishna taught, also teaches that before the tabernacle was constructed, sacrifices were brought from animals and birds that were kosher, but not from non-kosher species. And this is based on the verse that describes what Noah sacrificed when he exited the ark. And he took of every pure animal and of every pure fowl and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Genesis 8:20. So the Gemara asks, and were there pure and impure species at that time during the period of Noah? The distinction between pure, i.e. kosher, normally pure does not refer to kosher, right? Normally we're talking about, when we say pure, we're talking about ritual purity, tuma and tahara, has it come into contact with the source of impurity, etc. But in this context, we're talking about kosher and unkosher. So the distinction between kosher and unkosher was introduced only after the Torah was given. So Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says that Rabbi Yonasan says the pure animals that Noah took were from those that had not been used in the performance of sin. Right, so very interesting. Pure. Now, the challenge here is saying, no, pure was not referring to kosher or unkosher. It was referring to whether the animal had been used in sin, basically in some kind of bestiality. And the Gemara asks, from where did Noah and his sons know which animals had been used in the performance of a sin in order to prevent them from entering the ark? Could be bestiality, could be idolatry, but either way, how would they know which animals had been used by humans in other places? And the Gemara answers that it is in accordance with the statement of Rav Chisda. As Rav Chisda says, Noah caused all of the animals to pass before the ark. All animals that the ark accepted, i.e. drew in, were known to be pure. And if the ark did not accept them, it was known that they were impure. Rabbi Bahu says there is a different explanation as to how Noah knew which animals were pure or impure. The verse states, and they that went in, male and female of all flesh. Genesis 7:16, which means those that went in on their own. Consequently, Noah did not need to distinguish between pure and impure animals, as only the pure ones approached. God took care of it, right? I mean, it's not like Noah and his sons went out into the world on safaris and, captured all these animals to bring them to the ark. The animals came of their own accord. Clearly, they were led there by divine guidance. And now that God was taking this much of an interest in which animals would, walk who knows how many miles to get to Noah's ark, God was careful to choose the pure animals. In describing the sacrificial service before the tabernacle was constructed, the master said, all offerings brought before the construction of the tabernacle were sacrificed as burnt offerings. Okay, so in the period, all of human history until the Torah was given, and we learned that there would be different kinds of offerings: sin offering, guilt offering, burnt offering, peace offering, thanks offering, etc. Prior to the Torah being given and giving that system of offerings, people did worship by offering up to God, and all the offerings that were given were in the form of burnt offerings. Right, entirely consumed by the altar. People didn't give some to God and eat the rest. People didn't give some to God and give some to the priest. It was just entirely consumed on the altars where people brought offerings. So the Gemara infers, burnt offerings, yes, were sacrificed, but peace offerings were not sacrificed. They were only burnt offerings. But the Gemara challenges this and say, but with regard to the offerings that were sacrificed at Mount Sinai, at the giving of the Torah, and we alluded to this yesterday, it is written, quote, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. Right? And we talked about yesterday, well, who was bringing those offerings? Was it the firstborns of Israel, or was it already assigned to the sons of Aaron? We're very close to the giving of the Torah. They're literally at Mount Sinai, awaiting the revelation of the Lord and the giving of the Torah. but they brought offerings, at least as by way of saying thank you for delivering us from slavery in Egypt and drowning our oppressors in the sea, Pharaoh and all his chariots, the fiercest army in the world. So they offered to the Lord, and they offered both burnt offerings and peace offerings. So if you're saying that until the Torah was given, there were only burnt offerings, what are these peace offerings? This event occurred prior to the construction of the tabernacle. So rather say that the Baraisa means all offerings sacrificed were either burnt offerings or peace offerings. There weren't any other types, but there seemed to be peace offerings in addition to burnt offerings. And the Gemara challenges this and says, and isn't it taught in another Baraisa? But peace offerings were not sacrificed before the construction of the tabernacle. Rather, only burnt offerings were sacrificed. Clearly, burnt offerings, yes, were sacrificed, but peace offerings were not sacrificed. And the Gemara answers that this Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of the one who says that peace offerings were not sacrificed by the descendants of Noah, right? The Bnei Noach. As it was stated that there is a dispute between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina with regard to this. One says that the Bnei Noach sacrificed peace offerings, and one says that they did not sacrifice peace offerings. So let's look at the two opinions. What is the reasoning of the one who says that the Bnei Noach sacrificed peace offerings? As it is written, and Abel, who's Abel? Abel, like Cain and Abel. And Abel, he also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of the fat thereof. Now, it's interesting to call Abel one of the Bnei Noach. Right? That shows you that when we say the Bnei Noach, it is a category that basically means, all the people of the world that are not the Jews. Right? Once the Jews came into it and had a different set of commandments for them in the Torah, they would be, carved out of the Bnei Noah. Abel was 9 generations before Noah, right? Abel and his brother were the 3rd and 4th people in the world, way, way, way before Noah. But here what we're just talking about is all the people of the world prior to the Jews receiving the commandments in the Torah. So it would, as a legal category, it makes sense to talk about Abel as among the Bnei Noach. And the point is that Abel brought offerings, right? Abel brought offerings. What did he bring? He brought of the firstborn of his flock and of the fat thereof, right? He brought the best. He was a shepherd, and he brought from the best of his flock for the Lord. Abel, like all Gentiles, is categorized as a descendant of Noah. And the verse emphasizes that the fat was sacrificed. So the Gemara analyzes what is an item, i.e. an offering, the fat of which is sacrificed upon the altar, but that is not sacrificed in its entirety upon the altar. You must say, this is the peace offering, the meat of which is consumed by its owner. Now, what is the reason of the one who says that they did not sacrifice peace offerings, that all offerings part of the Torah were burnt offerings? As it is written, awake, O north, and come south, right? Awake, Uri. And this is from the Song of Songs 4:16. Awake, O north, and come south. Let my beloved come into his garden and eat his precious fruits. So the Gemara interprets this homiletically. The nation, i.e. the nations of the world who are the descendants of Noah, whose acts, i.e. sacrifices, are only in the north, i.e. they sacrifice only burnt offerings which are slaughtered and their blood collected in the north of the temple courtyard, they shall be removed, and in its place shall come the Jewish nation, whose acts, i.e. sacrifices, are in the north and in the south, as they sacrifice burnt offerings, whose rites are performed only in the north, and peace offerings, whose rites may be performed in the south, as the entire courtyard of the Holy Temple is fit for their rites, right? Offerings of the highest sanctity had to be performed in the north, burnt offerings included in that group. Peace offerings could be slaughtered in other sections of the courtyard. So the Gemara asks, and also according to the master who holds that the Bnei Noach did not sacrifice peace offerings, isn't it written, and of the fat thereof? from which it may be derived that Abel sacrificed a peace offering? And the Gemara answers, the fat thereof does not mean that Abel sacrificed only the fats of his offerings. Rather, it means that he sacrificed the fattest of them, i.e. the fattest and choicest of his animals. So the Gemara asks, and also according to the master who holds that the descendants of Noah did sacrifice peace offerings, isn't it written, awake, O north, from which it may be derived that the nations of the world do not sacrifice peace offerings? And the Gemara answers, in his opinion, that verse is written with regard to the ingathering of the exiles, i.e. the Jewish exiles will come from the north and south. So with regard to the opinion that the Bnei Noach did not sacrifice peace offerings, the Gemara asks, but isn't it written, quote, and Moses said, you must also give into our hand sacrifices, Zevachim, and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. This is Moses talking to Paro. Let my people go. We need to go out in the desert and sacrifice to God, and we're going to take all our animals with us because we don't know which animals we're going to be commanded to sacrifice once we get there. And it sounds like sacrifices and burnt offerings. Okay, so burnt offerings, right? This is all before giving the Torah. What is meant by sacrifices if that's an additional category to burnt offerings? Could that mean peace offerings? So this indicates that sacrifices, Zevachim, i.e. peace offerings, were sacrificed before the Torah was given. And the Gemara answers, in this context, Zevachim is referring to animals to be used for consumption, as the word Zevach can also be translated as animal for slaughter. And burnt offerings is referring to animals that would be used for sacrifice. Yeah, we're going to go out into the desert, we're going to have a feast. Some animals are for us to eat in the feast, and others are for burnt offerings. So we don't have proof that people were sacrificing both peace offerings and burnt offerings before the giving of the Torah. The Gemara notes that this works out well. So the Gemara asks, but isn't it written before the giving of the Torah, quote, and Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices, Zevachim, for God in Exodus 18:12. Now, since the word Zevachim there is referring to sacrifices, as the verse clearly states that Yitro took them for God, evidently peace offerings were sacrificed before the giving of the Torah. And the Gemara answers that verse was written with regard to the period after the giving of the Torah, when the Jewish people were permitted to sacrifice peace offerings. And the Gemara explains this works out well according to the one who says that the episode with Yitro was after the giving of the Torah. But according to the one who says that the episode with Yitro was before the giving of the Torah, then what can be said? As it is stated, the sons of Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi engage in a dispute concerning this issue. One says that the episode with Yitro was before the giving of the Torah, and one says that the episode with Yitro was after the giving of the Torah. And so the Gemara answers, the one who says that the episode with Yitro was before the giving of the Torah maintains that the descendants of Noah did sacrifice peace offerings. Now, the Gemara notes that the disagreement between Amoraim with regard to when Yitro came to Mount Sinai is like a dispute between Tanaim, the earlier sages of the period of the Mishna. So the Torah states with regard to Yitro, before he came to Mount Sinai, quote, now Yitro, the priest of Midian, the father-in-law of Moses, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel his people, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. That's Exodus 18:1. So what tiding did he hear that he came and converted, right, and joined the Jewish people? Rabbi Yehoshua says he heard about the war with Amalek, as it is written adjacent to the verses that state that Yitro came, right, where it said just before at the end of chapter 17 in Exodus, and Joshua weakened Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. right? Amalek, a truly evil group of people. And according to one view, it's not so much an actual, family of people as much as a toxic Jew-hating ideology. The people who can't even who can't really explain why they hate Jews, but they wish only violence and death to the Jews. They are Amalek, right? They are Amalek, and they will always be defeated in the end. Now, Rabbi Elazar Hamodai says, so what is it that Yitro heard? So one idea is, when he heard that what God had done for the Jewish people. So one view is he heard that the Jewish people defeated Amalek. Now, is that really as big news as God took them out with signs and wonders from slavery in Egypt? Well, Rabbi Elazar Hamodai says, Yitro heard about the giving of the Torah and came. And when the Torah was given to the Jewish people, the voice of the Holy One, blessed be He, went from one end of the world to the other end. Right? It wasn't a phenomena that was only experienced by the people present at Mount Sinai. When God revealed God's self to 2 million people at Mount Sinai, it was also God revealing God's self into the human physical world, the natural universe. And the reverberations of that were felt everywhere. From one end of the world to the other. And all the kings of the nation, and all the kings of the nations of the world were overcome with trembling in their palaces. And they recited a song of praise, as it is stated, quote, the voice of the Lord makes the hinds to calve. And in his palace all say, glory. This is Psalm 29. We're going to look at a bunch of lines from Psalm 29 in this discussion. I.e., each king in his own palace recited songs of praise to God. We love singing Psalm 29 in our shul. Mizmor leDavid. And it's all about the voice of the Lord, just crashing into the world and reverberating everywhere. Beautiful, beautiful psalm. So at that time, all the kings gathered around Bilam, the wicked, who was the greatest of the Gentile prophets, and said to him, what is the tumultuous sound, i.e. the loud noise that we have heard? Perhaps a flood is coming to destroy the world. As it is stated, the Lord sat enthroned at the flood in Psalm 29:10. And Bilam said to them, the Lord sits as king forever, which means that the Holy One, blessed be He, already took an oath after the flood never to bring a flood to the world, as it is stated, and the waters shall no more become a flood. Right? God promised after the flood there would not be another flood. So the kings said to him, well, he will not bring a flood of water, as he vowed, but perhaps he will bring a flood of fire, as in the future the Lord will punish the nations of the world with fire, as it is stated, for by fire will the Lord contend, and by his sword with all flesh, and the slain of the Lord shall be many. Isaiah 66:16. Bilam said to them, he already took an oath that he will not destroy all flesh in any manner, as it is stated, to destroy all flesh, something he vowed not to do in Genesis 9:15. Therefore, don't worry, there will not be a flood of fire. So they asked, right, this is, again, all the kings of the world felt, it wasn't just a loud noise, right? You understand, it was a roar unlike anything that had ever been heard before when God appeared at Mount Sinai. They knew something was happening in the world. And they asked their prophet Bilam, what's going on? And so they said, well, and if so, what is this tumultuous sound that we have heard? And Bilam said to them, he, meaning God, has a good and precious item in his treasury that was hidden away with him for 974 generations before the world was created. And he seeks to give it to his children. As it is stated, the Lord will give strength to his people. Psalm 29:11. Adonai oz le'amo yitain, Adonai yivareches amo v'shalom is the next line, and here it is, right? The Lord will give strength to his people. Strength is a reference to the Torah, which is the strength of the Jewish people. And immediately they all began to say, the Lord will bless his people with peace. So the Gemara offers another explanation of what Yitro heard. Rabbi Eliezer says he heard about the splitting of the Red Sea. And he came, as it is stated in a similar context with regard to the splitting of the Jordan in the days of Joshua. Quote, and it came to pass when all the kings of the Amorites that were beyond the Jordan westward and all the kings of the Canaanites that were by the sea heard how that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan from before the children of Israel until they were passed over, that their heart melted. Neither was there spirit in them anymore because of the children of Israel. That's Joshua 5:1, right? And in that, after that incident, even Rachav, the prostitute, said to Joshua's messengers, "For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you." Right? So the idea that that the splitting of the sea was an event of such miracle and magnitude that the news got out and everyone heard about that and heard about it quickly. And that's what Yitro was responding to when he came and joined the Jewish people. So the Gemara asks, what is different there with regard to the splitting of the Jordan, where the verse states, neither was there spirit in them anymore? And what is different here, i.e. in the statement of Rachav, when the verse states, neither did there remain any more spirit in any man, in Joshua 2:11. Right? The concept is everyone heard about it and they were scared. They were scared that God had chosen a people and would fight for them. And they're like, we can't oppose those people. But the wording is different in these two verses. What do we learn from that? Now we're on 116b. So the Gemara replies that Rachav used this phrase euphemistically to say that their fear was so great that their male organs were not even able to become erect, as kama also means rise. So the Gemara asks, and how did Rachav know this? How did she know what's going on in the pants of all the men of the world? And the Gemara replies, as the master said, you do not have any prince or ruler at that time who did not engage in intercourse with Rachav, the prostitute. She was the preeminent prostitute of the world. And as we recall, she lived literally in the wall of Jericho, right? And so when the children of Israel crossed the Jordan and beginning the wars of conquest at the beginning of the book of Joshua, right? First, Joshua sends some spies in to see what's going on. They talk to Rachav. They learn that the people are terrified. They learn that from her. And she says, we all know that the Lord is with you and everyone's going to be delivered into your hands. And so she basically at that point became a righteous convert and she was saved. She was saved. And there was a red thread, that marked her window so that she would be spared in the conquest of Jericho. Now the Gemara adds that the sages said with regard to Rachav, and then, by the way, she became Joshua's wife. She was 10 years old when the Jewish people left Egypt, and she engaged in prostitution all 40 years that the Jewish people were in the wilderness. After that, when she was 50 years old, she converted when the two spies visited her. And she said, may all of my sins of prostitution be forgiven me as a reward for having endangered myself with the rope, the window, and the flax, by means of which she saved the two spies sent in by Joshua. So Rachav first concealed the spies in the stalks of flax and later assisted them in exiting her home by lowering them from the window with a rope, because she lived in the wall of Jericho. Okay, next topic. The master said in the Baraisa that discussed the sacrifice of offerings before the construction of the tabernacle, quote, and today, meaning at the time of the Gemara, and today Gentiles are permitted to do so, i.e. to sacrifice offerings outside the temple courtyard. We're back to the prohibition. A Jew cannot bring offerings outside the temple courtyard, but a non-Jew can, as long as it's to God. All people are prohibited in idolatry, but if a non-Jew wants to bring an offering to God on his own private altar, he is welcome to do that. Where and today Gentiles are permitted to do so, i.e. to sacrifice offerings outside the temple courtyard, despite the fact that this is forbidden for the Jews. So the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? As the sages taught with regard to the verses that prohibit the slaughter of offerings outside the temple, quote, speak to Aaron and to his sons and to all the children of Israel. This indicates that only Jews are commanded with regard to the prohibition on slaughtering offerings outside the temple. But Gentiles are not commanded with regard to offerings slaughtered outside the temple. Therefore, each and every Gentile may, if he desires, construct a private altar for himself and sacrifice upon it whatever he desires, at least according to Jewish law. The Jewish law doesn't prohibit them from doing that. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha says that Rav Asi says, although it is permitted for Gentiles to sacrifice offerings outside the temple courtyard, it is prohibited for a Jew to assist them or to fulfill their agency in this matter, as sacrificing in this manner is forbidden for a Jew. And Rabbah said, but to instruct them how to sacrifice outside the temple is permitted. And this is similar to that incident in which Ifera Hormuz, the mother of King Shapur of Persia, sent an offering to the great sage Rava, with which she sent this message to him: sacrifice this for me for the sake of heaven. So Rava said to Rav Safra and Rav Acha Bar Huna, go, take two Gentile youths of the same age, i.e. similar to one another, so that the sacrifice will be performed with maximal beauty, and see where the sea currently raises silt, sirton, which is a place that no one has used before, and take new wood and bring out fire from new vessels, and these two non-Jewish youths will sacrifice the offering for her for the sake of heaven. Remember, this is the mother of the emperor, right? The emperor of the Persian Empire. So, they're going to do their best to make her happy. But Jews themselves cannot make an offering outside the temple, so that's why they had to bring in non-Jews to do it. Abaye said to Rava, in accordance with whose opinion was the instruction to sacrifice exclusively with new wood? Was it in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua? As it is taught in the Baraisa that Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua says, just as the altar is a place that is not used by an ordinary person, so too the wood that will be used must not be used by an ordinary person. And the Gemara asks, but doesn't Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua concede that in the case of a private altar, the wood need not be new? As it is taught in a Baraisa with regard to David's purchase of the site of the temple, when he wished to build an altar there at God's instruction, one verse states, quote, so David gave to Ornan for the place 600 shekels of gold by weight. And David built there an altar to the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. Now, was this a private altar? No, David is setting up the place where the temple would be, and he brought the tabernacle and the national altar there while they were awaiting the construction of the temple by Solomon. And David built there an altar to the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. And it is written elsewhere, so David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver. And David built there an altar to the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. How can these texts be reconciled? They're a little bit different. David would collect from each tribe of the 12 tribes 50 shekels. Which are a sum of 600, right? Was it 50? Was it 60? No, it's 50 from each tribe, and that made it 600. Rebbe says in the name of Abba Yosef ben Dostai that there is another explanation. David purchased the cattle and the wood and the site of the altar for 50 shekels, and he purchased the site of the entire temple for 600 shekels. Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua says likewise, David purchased the cattle and the wood and the site of the altar for 50 shekels and the site of the entire temple for 600 shekels. As it is written, and Arona said to David, let my lord the king Take and offer that which is good in his eyes. See the cattle for the burnt offering, and the threshing tools and the implements of the cattle for the wood. This is all 2 Samuel chapter 24. To which David replied, no, I will buy it from you for a price. So consequently, according to the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua, David purchased the threshing instruments and the furniture of the oxen for use as wood. And Rava could have said to you in response, there too, in the case of David, the verse is dealing with new vessels that had not been used. In other words, of course, we want to use the very finest when we're offering to God, when we're building a place of offering to God. Anything involved in offering to God has to be of the absolute choicest and finest possible. The Gemara asks, what are the threshing instruments? Which, by the way, for almost 2,000 years, we could not bring offerings, right? What has replaced offerings as our primary form of worship? Prayer, right? Prayer. So if you think about, well, the only kinds of offerings that could be brought were the choicest and finest animals. Animals were a very expensive commodity. So when people sacrificed an animal, right? I mean, the word sacrifice means, all the proper procedures of offering up and sprinkling the blood, etc. But it also has that meaning of, sacrificing. It causes you, to give up something that you would otherwise have, something that you value and that you value highly. So that's why we should remember that, and I've been guilty of this so many times. I've been guilty of this, like when you're praying in a hurry, right? And it's just like lip service, just mumbling through it. Just make sure that you're yotze, you fulfilled your obligation. And it's hard, to pray with, full intent and meaning and, sort of sacrificing from the heart and from your best and putting real time into it. When you do it every day, 3 times a day, you can fall into that rut and routine. But it's always good to remember that, we're supposed to be giving our best. We're supposed to be giving our finest, our choicest. Okay, so the Gemara asks, what are the threshing instruments, morigim, mentioned in this verse? So Ula said it is a turbal bed. Turbal. Apparently from the Greek tribolos, among its meanings is sledge or threshing machine. In essence, it is a heavy wooden board that contains notches or spikes on its underside so that when it is dragged by an animal over grain on the threshing floor, the act of threshing, i.e. separation of grain kernels and stalks, takes place. Okay. So the Gemara asks, what are the threshing instruments? And Ula said it is the turbal bed. And the Gemara asks, what is a turbal bed? Abaye said it is a heavy serrated board used for threshing. Abaye said, what is the verse from which the meaning of morigim is derived? Behold, I have made you a new threshing board, morag, having sharp teeth. You shall thresh the mountains and beat them small, and shall make the hills as chaff. From Isaiah 41. This verse indicates that a morag has grooves and teeth and is used for threshing. So with regard to the contradiction between the verses that relate to the sum of shekels paid by David for the location of the Holy Temple, the Gemara says that Rava was teaching these verses to his son and raised a contradiction between the verses. So it is written, so David gave to Ornan 600 shekels of gold by weight in 1 Chronicles 21. And it is written, so David bought 50 shekels of silver in 2 Samuel 24. How do we reconcile these texts? David would collect from each tribe of each of the 12 tribes 50 shekels each, which are a sum of 600. So the Gemara asks, but these verses are still difficult, as they contradict one another, since there in the book of Samuel, it is stated that David paid silver shekels, while here in Chronicles, it is stated that he paid gold shekels. And the Gemara replies, rather, this is what the verses are saying. David would collect from each tribe silver shekels that had the value of 50 gold shekels in weight, so that the value of the final sum was equal to 600 gold shekels. Now, the Mishna teaches that once the tabernacle was established in the wilderness, offerings of lesser sanctity were eaten throughout the camp of Israel. right? So this is and now we're going to come back, of course, and once again draw that analogy between the encampment of all the tribes of Israel in the wilderness is equivalent to Jerusalem. The Levite camp in the midst of the Israelite camp is equivalent to the Temple Mount, and the tabernacle in the midst of the Levite camp is equivalent to the Holy Temple in the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. So, when we talk about offerings of lesser sanctity, like peace offerings, they would be slaughtered in the courtyard, blood sprinkled on the altar, but then they could leave the temple, and the owners of those peace offerings could eat them and celebrate with them anywhere in the city of Jerusalem. They couldn't leave Jerusalem, so it was equivalent to the encampment of the Israelites. And I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. So the Mishna teaches, we're back to our Mishna here, the first Mishna of chapter 14. The Mishna teaches that once the tabernacle was established in the wilderness, offerings of lesser sanctity were eaten throughout the camp of Israel. Rav Huna says this means that the offerings of lesser sanctity were eaten in any place of the places that an Israelite would be found. But there was no actual camp outside of which it was prohibited to eat the offerings. Rav Nachman raised an objection to Rav Huna. And were there not camps when the Jews were in the wilderness? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa, just as there was a camp in the wilderness that was divided into different sections, with each section having particular laws pertaining to the consumption of offerings and to the ritually impure individuals who were prohibited from entering there? So too, there is a corresponding camp in Jerusalem. The area from the walls of Jerusalem to the Temple Mount have the status of the Israelite camp. The area from the Temple Mount to Nicanor's gate at the entrance of the temple courtyard has the status of the Levite camp. And from that point onward, i.e. from the entrance of the temple courtyard, the area has the status of the camp of the divine presence. And the temple courtyard has the same status as the area within the curtains surrounding the courtyard of the tabernacle in the wilderness. So the Gemara replies, rather say that Rav Huna meant that when the tabernacle was in the wilderness, offerings of lesser sanctity could be consumed wherever the Israelite camp was located. And the Gemara asks, well, isn't that obvious? Wherever the Jews were located in the wilderness was where the Israelite camp was. Bakru Banzai, no matter where you go, there you are. The Gemara responds, lest you say that during the periods of travel between encampments, the offerings were taken outside the Israelite camp and were thereby disqualified due to the meat leaving the area within the partitions. Rav Huna teaches us that the meat is not disqualified. If it was with the Israelites, it was in the Israelite camp. The Gemara asks, but why not say that this is indeed so? I.e. that the meat is disqualified if they broke camp and traveled to the next location where the camp would be set up again. Shouldn't we say that the meat left the Israelite camp? And the Gemara answers that the verse states, then the tent of meeting with the camp of the Levites shall travel in the midst of the camps. As they encamp, so shall they travel. That's Numbers 2:17, which indicates that although it traveled from its place, it is still the tent of meeting, and similarly, the Israelite camp retains the status of a camp even while it was traveling in the wilderness. We'll stop there. And just one comment from Sharon. How can a person be a treifa? Isn't it an animal disqualified from sacrifice? Humans are never qualified for sacrifice. Well, in this case, they were just going with the very specific meaning that treifa means somebody has, or an animal has a wound that will cause it to die within 12 months. That's what treifa means. The fact that it is a treifa disqualifies it from being brought as a sacrifice, but a human could also have such a wound. But it was, it was sort of being offered hypothetically because, in fact, Noah was not a treifa. But it was only in that limited sense that they were talking about Noah as a treifa. That's what I've got for us tonight. And with God's help, we'll see you tomorrow, Wednesday. Just one note, we'll have class, God willing, tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday. And then I'm on my way to Clearwater, Florida for a special event. There's going to be a Shabbaton with me and Chabad in Clearwater and Rabbi Hodakov. We're going to have a Shabbos dinner on Friday night and then a screening of Guns N' Moses on Saturday night. So anyone in the region of Tampa would love to see you there. The point being, we won't have class on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. I'm coming back on Monday, and so we should be able to have class next Monday, right? So for this week, the schedule is class Wednesday and Thursday, regular time. Then we'll be off Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That's what I've got for us tonight. All the best. Take care.